Hugh O'Donnell, born in Dublin in 1427, he grew up in an Ireland that was much different to the one that we are used to in 1169. In 1169, with the Norman conquest, the Normans would take over large parts of Ireland. However, within the Gaelic resurgence in 1250, the Irish had taken back many of their territories, and leading into the 100 Years' War, Ireland would continue their expansion. Now in the year of 1427, with the birth of Hugh O'Donnell, Ireland was a far different place and constructed far different to the one that we knew back in the Norman conquest. You see, before the Norman conquest, Ireland was ran by the old Tuatha system, with a high king on top, the King of Tara, and below him many different kings that owed him a form of submission through cattle tribute. However, with the coming of the Normans, all this had changed. And with that, the Gaelic and the Normans had to adapt to the new growing world and the changes throughout the wider European landscape. As Europe and many places throughout the world had to adapt to the ever-changing society and the rise of nationalism within these various kingdoms. By the end of the 100 Years' War, Joan of Arc would have established the foundations to French nationalism. The same can be seen in Scotland and in England. Ireland was no different, and at this point, the Irish, the Hiberno Normans, and the Gaelic had been pushing for their own Irish Parliament. This change within Irish society is where Hugh O'Donnell comes in. He was born in a Dublin that was rapidly changing, turning away from pro-English ideas. And don't get me wrong, there are still strong Yorkists living in Dublin who identify themselves as proud English men and women. But at the same time, not many of them can speak English. It is believed, highly believed, that the majority of the individuals in Dublin, although they dress like anyone from Bristol or London, still speak the native tongue of Gaelic in this period. And many people living in Dublin also identify themselves as proud Gaelic people who were exceptionally pro-independent Irish Parliament. Ireland in this period is very mixed, and one family in particular that was leading the changes in Ireland were the Fitzgeralds. Hugh O'Donnell was put into their family as a hostage. Not a hostage in a negative sense that he was forcefully taken, but a hostage in goodwill of an alliance between the O'Donnells, the Fitzgeralds, the O'Neills, the O'Connors, and the McSweeneys. One must also look at the definition of the Lordship of Ireland at this time. When the Lordship of Ireland was first set up in 1171, it was set up by the King of England, Henry II. This was the territory that he would occupy from the MacMora clan. This was the Kingdom of Leinster, which MacMora had taken over as part of the Cambro-Norman conquest in 1169. Technically speaking, the Cambro-Normans should have been faithful and subjected to Henry II. So when Henry II had arrived in 1171, he had straight away occupied those territories and made it a part of his own realm, which was referred to as the Lordship of Ireland. However, this definition had completely changed 300 years after, in 1427. Now, the realm of the Lordship of Ireland didn't really exist, and the territories of the English king now only existed between the outskirts of Dublin up to Dundalk. Even the territories of Meath and various other territories that was under Norman control had gone on independent to themselves. This had been seen with the rise of the Irish Parliament, where lords in that Parliament who were once faithful to the English king had gone independent from the crown, and they themselves had become lords within the Irish Parliament. The English in 1550 had written down and admitted that they no longer understood how Ireland was ran in this period. And so instead of trying to understand the system, the English chose to refer to it as savagery and wanted to destroy it and rebuild it in the image of the English crown, English feudalism that they understood. Truly, what the English couldn't understand was how Irish barons, unlike English barons who followed and were told what to do by a man superior to them, Irish barons, on the other hand, were a lord unto themselves in their own territory, meaning that they were the law. Although every single Irish lord in Ireland followed their own bastard laws, in particular in the south and east of Ireland, the Gaelic, on the other hand, the north and west of Ireland, would have followed the old Brehon laws. Regardless, the Irish lords were their own dictators, which the English had seen as barbarous, backwards. The fact that they were not following the laws that were put out in front of the church through canon law and the laws of the king. Now, the Irish lords still had their own chain of command going on, which slightly differed in each one of the territories, that went like this: Tyrconnell, Céim Pobal, Céim Cuimhneach. Finally, Taoiseach, which was the prince of the clan, and Taoiseach, who was head of the clan. This was the new, ever-changing world that Hugh was growing up in, under the care of James Fitzgerald. He would have gotten a fine education on how to horse ride, both Gaelic style and English style, and he would have learned English, Irish and Latin, and his education would have been very wide, both internally in Ireland and external, learning about the various courts of Europe in Dublin. We can tell all of this because of the future actions that O'Donnell would take, as he would be very pro-Irish Parliament, which really shows how much of a deep open mind O'Donnell would have gained while growing up in Dublin, that he didn't think about just clan on clan fighting. Of course he did take part as part of the politics of Ireland, but he also thought of the bigger, wider world as well. This was a world where the 100 Years' War dominated. The 100 Years' War was coming to an end at this point between England and France, but it really dominated the politics. And because England was vastly changing and starting to tear into the Wars of the Roses, a civil conflict, there was more change happening. Furthermore, Florence had gone into a renaissance, and this renaissance that we can see with trade coming into Ireland, one of the greatest examples of this being in Waterford with the golden dress that we can see that the clergy would have worn. This heavily impacted Ireland as Ireland starts to go into a renaissance, the Renaissance of Ireland. A vastly changing Dublin really can be seen to have an impact on O'Donnell. Furthermore, as we go into the period of the Wars of the Roses, many Yorkists start to come in, one of which was Richard of York, who wanted support out of the Irish Parliament. The Fitzgeralds would grant him his support, and in return he would give more power to the Fitzgeralds. Eventually, Edward would come to Ireland seeking even more support. At this point, the Fitzgeralds wanted an independent Irish Parliament away from England. They would still continue to recognise the English king as Lord of Ireland, but the English king would no longer have the power to dictate the Irish Parliament. So in 1460, Edward would recognise an independent Irish Parliament, allowing him to do away with the Statutes of Kilkenny, which had been heavily impacting the Hiberno-Norman lords and their various marriage alliances with various Gaelic clans. Of course, these Hiberno-Normans were also marrying into English families as well, and European, making it very complicated. But of course, that's history. History is much more complicated than one would first assume. Fitzgeralds, the O'Neills and the McSweeneys had recognised Hugh O'Donnell as Taoiseach of the O'Donnell clan. So with the death of his father in 1461, Hugh O'Donnell and his allies would muster up a force and march on Tyrconnell so he could take his kingship for himself. He had different rivals. You see, at this time, it did not pass from father to son. It was an election process where members of the clan would elect who they wanted next. This mostly went down to who had the best military force and also who had the most wealth. However, this didn't stop other people who wanted to contend for the role of Taoiseach, head of clan, by just going off and killing the head of clan. Sometimes this would happen just before or after the Taoiseach had just died, that they would go out of their way to kill the Taoiseach and take his place. This had actually happened just as Hugh O'Donnell had marched on Tyrconnell. Many rebels had suddenly emerged to kill Hugh O'Donnell and take his place as Taoiseach of the O'Donnell clan. However, his allies and himself wouldn't have it that way, and they would insert their power in Tyrconnell and kill his rivals in a large battle that had taken place in that year. Hugh O'Donnell would go on to take his rightful role as Taoiseach of the Clan O'Donnell in 1461. At that point, Hugh O'Donnell needed to establish himself as ruler of the north, and he did so by carrying out many cattle raids and taking submission. His allies had also given him the right cattle tribute as a form of goodwill between his various allies of the north. Eventually, Hugh O'Donnell, because of his good politics in the north, was recognised as a nickname King of the North. However, at this point, there is no official Kings of the North because we had transitioned from a period where kings had been recognised in Ireland, the classic 150 kings from the Romans, to a period of Taoiseachs. So that word had no longer existed anymore for most of Ireland. The only people who had this recognised title were the O'Connors, who were recognised not just inside of Ireland, but outside of Ireland as well, as the Kings of Connacht. As always, to grow power and influence in his area, he built up a marriage alliance with the O'Brien clan, marrying Nuala O'Brien. In 1464, with the continued influence of the Irish Parliament and the Yorkists taking control of the Wars of the Roses, O'Donnell went to Dublin to take part in the Irish Parliament. This is the very first time that we see Gaelic members such as the O'Connors, the O'Donnells and the O'Neills take part in Irish Parliament, which is strictly against the Statutes of Kilkenny. This would be in the complete disdain to the English back in London, who at the time were completely against the Fitzgeralds' moves. Regardless, because of this more independent Irish Parliament that we see from 1460 up to 1534, we'd start to see far more mixing between the Hiberno or Normans and of course the Gaelic clans, making it a much more complicated situation. And let's not just ignore the fact that we also see the likes of Kildare Fitzgerald going between the English court and the Irish Parliament, which makes it very complicated in this period and also very interesting. We can also see the Fitzgeralds visiting various courts throughout Europe, making them very international. We can see members of the Fitzgerald clan even going as far as Florence and getting very much involved within the growing renaissance of the era. So in fact, even if the English didn't understand it and wanted to erase it, they ultimately failed to do so. And today, in 2022, the Irish Parliament is still going strong, with its foundations from the 15th century. Hugh O'Donnell will continue to go strong in the north of Ireland, bringing the north of Ireland into a golden age of renaissance, of great high towers, art, poetry and literature that we can still see today from this time period alone. Hugh O'Donnell had lived a remarkable life full of change. He was born coming to the end of the 100 Years' War. He would live through the Wars of the Roses, and he'd taken part in the Irish Parliament. Also guys, we're slowly getting the merchandise up and running again. I really hope you enjoyed the video. And I'd love to get some feedback on what you guys think of the channel so far. What do you guys think of me having guests on the Wednesday? And also, what do you think of my own videos on the weekends? We're also thinking about pushing up and having more live streams coming in, Q&A. In fact, on the 8th of May, we're thinking about having Denton over just to talk about Irish Vikings and to answer some of your questions as well. And just to get to know you guys a bit better. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and all the best.